The lid of the cooler cracked open with a loud creak. Inside, instead of fish and ice, the officers froze at what they saw. Small, pale arms, a lifeless face, the body of 12-year-old Ethan Miller curled up like it was nothing more than yesterday's catch. The stench hit them next, stronger than the salty river breeze that had carried them to this remote fishing dock. One officer stumbled back, his hand covering his mouth, while another whispered in disbelief, "Dear God, it's the boy." The silence that followed was heavy. The cooler, which was supposed to keep bait and beer, had become a coffin. And the worst part? The man who was supposed to love and protect Ethan, his own uncle, was the one who had locked him inside. But how could family turn into something so dark? How did a fishing trip meant for bonding become the scene of a nightmare? The answer would tear apart a family, shake an entire town, and leave investigators chasing the truth behind one of the most chilling betrayals they had ever seen. Ethan Miller was like most 12-year-old boys in Springfield, Missouri. He loved baseball, fishing, and anything that let him run outside until the streetlights came on. His mom, Rachel, called him her little explorer, because Ethan always wanted to try new things, whether it was climbing the tallest tree in their backyard or building forts out of cardboard boxes with his friends. Life in the Miller household was simple. Rachel worked as a nurse, often pulling long night shifts at the hospital, while Ethan's dad had been out of the picture for years. It was just the two of them most of the time. And in that little bubble of family, Ethan was her whole world. Still, there was one person Rachel trusted almost as much as herself, her older brother, Thomas Miller, age 49. To neighbors, Thomas was a quiet type, a man who enjoyed fishing at the lake, fixing old cars, and sitting on his porch with a cigarette dangling from his lips. He never married, never had kids, and lived alone in a run-down house on the edge of town. But to Ethan, Uncle Thomas was fun. He told funny stories, bought him snacks his mom wouldn't, and promised him adventures that sounded bigger than life. So, when Thomas offered to take Ethan on a fishing trip one weekend, Rachel didn't hesitate. She thought, Ethan will love it. He needs more time with a man in his life. The Saturdays started out calm. Rachel packed Ethan's favorite snacks, peanut butter crackers and a soda, and kissed him on the cheek. Be good, okay? And don't forget sunscreen. Mom, Ethan groaned, rolling his eyes. It's just fishing. Rachel laughed. She watched her son climb into Thomas's old red pickup truck, the cooler already strapped in the back, fishing rods rattling against the window. She waved until they drove out of sight. That was the last time she saw her son alive. At first, the day passed without worry. Rachel went about her chores, folded laundry, and even took a short nap after her night shift. But by evening, when the sun dipped low and Ethan still hadn't returned, a pit of fear grew in her stomach. She called Thomas's phone. No answer. She called again. Nothing. By 9 p.m., panic consumed her. She dialed the police. My son, he's not home. He was supposed to be with my brother. I can't reach either of them. An officer reassured her. Ma'am, sometimes fishing trips run late. We'll put out a notice. But Rachel knew. A mother knows. Something was wrong. Hours later, deputies spotted Thomas's red truck parked near a remote fishing dock. The cooler was still in the back, sealed shut with a heavy latch. Thomas wasn't in sight. When the officers opened it, their worst fears came true. Ethan's lifeless body lay crumpled inside. His lips were blue. His small chest never rose again. The fishing trip had turned into a nightmare no one could have imagined, and the uncle who promised to keep him safe had vanished. The news spread like wildfire through Springfield that night. Police cars with flashing lights lined the fishing dock, their red and blue glows reflecting across the water like a twisted carnival. Neighbors, fishermen, and even strangers stood at a distance, whispering in disbelief as the scene unfolded. Sheriff Daniel Harper, a man in his late 40s with graying hair and tired eyes, was the one called to lead the case. He had seen plenty of crime in his 20 years of service, but nothing prepared him for seeing the body of a child inside a cooler. He took a slow breath before pulling out his notepad. We need to lock this scene down. Search the truck. Search the area. Find Thomas Miller. Rachel arrived not long after. When she saw the police tape and flashing lights, her knees buckled. She begged officers to let her through, screaming Ethan's name. Sheriff Harper approached carefully, his voice low but firm. "Ma'am, I need you to stay back for now." "Where's my son?" "Where's Ethan?" she cried, clutching his shirt sleeve with trembling hands. Harper hesitated. Delivering that kind of news was the hardest part of his job. Finally, he said softly, "I'm so sorry, ma'am. We found your boy, but he didn't make it." Rachel's scream echoed across the dock, silencing the crowd. Some turned away, unable to watch her crumble to the ground. That was the kind of grief you couldn't unsee. For investigators, the immediate question was simple. Where was Thomas Miller? If he wasn't dead, he was on the run. And if he was on the run, he was guilty. Detectives combed through the truck. The fishing rods were still there, a tackle box half open on the passenger seat. Beer cans rattled under the bench seat. But something stood out. Thomas's wallet and phone were still in the truck. If he planned to run, why would he leave those behind? Then there was the cooler itself. It wasn't an ordinary fishing cooler. It was industrial, built to keep meat frozen for days. Inside, beyond Ethan's body, officers found rope fibers and duct tape. That meant Ethan hadn't simply drowned or fallen victim to an accident. He had been restrained. Someone had planned this. "Get forensics out here," Harper ordered, and put out a bolo on Thomas Miller. He's either hiding in the woods or someone helped him disappear. The early hours of the investigation were chaos. Reporters gathered. Rumors swirled. Some said Thomas had been drinking heavily and snapped. Others whispered darker things. That Thomas had a history no one knew about. Back at the station, Rachel sat in an interrogation room, wrapped in a blanket, her hands shaking as she clutched a photo of Ethan from her purse. Harper entered quietly, taking a seat across from her. "I know this is hard," he began gently, "but we need to ask you about your brother. Did he ever act strangely around Ethan?" Rachel shook her head, tears spilling down her cheeks. "He was always good to him. He was the only man Ethan looked up to. I trusted him. I trusted my own brother." Her voice cracked on the last word. The betrayal was a knife in her chest. While Rachel's grief poured out, deputies scoured Thomas's house. It was a mess. Beer bottles stacked in corners, dirty dishes crusted over in the sink, and a calendar with only one date circled in red. The day of the fishing trip. In the bedroom, detectives found something chilling, a locked drawer. Inside were photographs of Ethan, some from family barbecues, some from school events, all cut out and taped onto the wall in neat rows. Next to them was a hunting knife. The case was no longer about an uncle who made a mistake. It was about something far more. But before Sheriff Harper could make sense of what they had, a deputy burst into the station, out of breath. "Sheriff, you need to come quick. We just found Thomas." Thomas Miller wasn't found miles away, hiding in some far-off city. He was discovered barely 5 miles from the fishing dock, crouched in a drainage tunnel like a scared animal. It was a group of teenagers who spotted him first while riding their bikes near the old railroad tracks. They noticed a man's boot sticking out of the tunnel. When they got closer, they realized it was the very man plastered all over the news. Terrified, they raced to the nearest gas station and called the police. By the time deputies arrived, Thomas didn't even resist. His face was pale, his hands caked with mud, and his clothes smelled of river water and sweat. He muttered only 3 words as they dragged him out. "It wasn't me." When news hit that he was in custody, Springfield exhaled. But for Sheriff Harper, the hardest part was just beginning. Arresting Thomas was only step 1. Proving what happened to Ethan and why was another battle altogether. At the station, Thomas sat slouched in the interrogation room, his eyes bloodshot. Harper and Detective Linda Vargas, his sharpest investigator, entered. "Thomas," Harper began, keeping his voice calm, "your nephew was found in your cooler. You were the last person seen with him. Do you want to explain that?" Thomas shook his head slowly. I don't remember." Detective Vargas leaned forward. "You don't remember? A boy doesn't just end up in a cooler by accident. Did you drink? Did you black out?" Thomas stared at the table, silent. His fingers drummed nervously. Finally, he whispered, "I didn't kill him." But every piece of evidence screamed otherwise. His truck, the duct tape, the rope fibers, a calendar, all tied back to him. Yet something about his demeanor unsettled Vargas. He looked more broken than defensive. Meanwhile, forensic results started rolling in. The medical examiner confirmed Ethan hadn't drowned. He had been suffocated. The duct tape around his mouth had left deep red marks. His wrists bore bruises consistent with restraints. It wasn't an accident. It was deliberate. The pressure was mounting, not just on Thomas, but on Harper too. The media was relentless, demanding answers. Parents in town were furious, demanding justice. If we can't trust our own family, who can we trust? One mother told a reporter on live TV, but the case wasn't as straightforward as it seemed. There were gaps. No fingerprints on the duct tape. No DNA inside the cooler besides Ethan's. And strangely, no direct evidence linking Thomas to the act itself. We can't build a case on just suspicion, Vargas muttered late one night, poring over files with Harper. What if someone else was there? What if Thomas didn't act alone? Harper rubbed his temples. Or worse, what if we're chasing the wrong man? The possibility was terrifying. If Thomas wasn't the killer, that meant the real perpetrator was still out there, and they had just pinned the crime on the wrong person. That night, Rachel Miller sat in her darkened living room, staring at the news coverage. Her brother's face filled the screen, the words "murder suspect" flashing below it. She clutched Ethan's baseball glove to her chest, whispering through her tears, "Why, Thomas? Why my baby?" She wanted answers, and so did the entire town. The next morning, however, investigators received a phone call that changed everything. A witness had come forward, and what he claimed to have seen at the fishing dock the day Ethan disappeared would blow the case wide open. The caller's voice was shaky over the phone, but his words cut through the quiet of the station like a blade. "My name's Henry Walker," he said. "I fish out at the dock most weekends. That day, the day the boy disappeared, I saw Thomas, but he wasn't alone." Detective Vargas nearly dropped her pen. "Not alone? Who was with him?" Henry hesitated. "I couldn't see clear. It was another man, tall, wearing a gray hoodie. They were arguing by the truck. I thought it was just drunk talk, so I didn't step in. But now I think that other man had something to do with the boy." Vargas scribbled every word. Harper, standing nearby, crossed his arms. This wasn't what he expected. They had locked Thomas in a cell, but what if he hadn't acted alone? Or worse, what if the whole town had been too quick to point the finger at him? When they brought Henry in for a full statement, he was adamant. He described how the boy looked nervous, shifting from foot to foot, and how Thomas's cooler was already latched shut even though he hadn't seen a single fish caught. "It didn't sit right with me," Henry said, "but I didn't think nothing of it until I heard the news." That testimony created a problem. The prosecution wanted to paint Thomas as the sole monster, but now there was doubt. Was there another player in this twisted game? Back in the interrogation room, Harper and Vargas confronted Thomas again. "Your neighbor says you weren't alone at the dock," Harper said firmly. "Who was with you?" Thomas's eyes flickered with fear. He opened his mouth, then shut it again. "Talk, Thomas," Vargas pressed. "Was it someone you know? Did they hurt Ethan?" His jaw clenched. "I can't," he whispered. "Can't or won't." Harper demanded. Thomas stared at the wall, silent. The interview ended with more questions and answers. Meanwhile, the community's grief was turning into rage. Candlelight vigils were held for Ethan. Parents clutched their children tighter. Social media exploded with hashtags demanding justice. Rachel could hardly walk into a grocery store without whispers following her, half pity, half suspicion. Some asked how she hadn't seen this coming, while others wondered if Thomas had been planning something darker for years. The investigators pressed on. Phone records showed Thomas hadn't called or texted anyone the day of the trip. No strange numbers appeared in his log. But Vargas wasn't convinced. What if he used a burner phone? Or what if the man in the hoodie has been hiding in plain sight? Then came the most puzzling detail yet. Forensic techs found footprints near the dock that didn't match Thomas's size 11 boots. They were smaller, closer to a size 9. It was the first piece of physical evidence that suggested someone else had indeed been there. But just as investigators felt a breakthrough coming, the case took a sharp turn backward. The witness, Henry Walker, suddenly recanted. I must have been mistaken, he told police days later. It was getting dark. Maybe I imagined it. But his eyes betrayed him. He was scared. Someone had gotten him. When Harper asked him directly, Henry shook his head violently. Please, just drop it. I didn't see nothing. Forget I called. The roadblock was clear. Someone wanted the truth buried. That night, as Harper locked up his files, he told Vargas in a low voice, We're not just chasing a killer anymore. We're chasing a cover-up. And the cover-up was closing in fast. The breakthrough didn't come in the form of a new witness or some dramatic confession. It came from a quiet piece of evidence sitting in the evidence locker, the cooler itself. Detective Vargas had been restless, unable to sleep, and she went back to the station late at night to go over the case files again. Something nagged at her. The cooler wasn't just a random piece of gear. It was too big, too industrial, too specific. She requested a trace on the serial number stamped into its metal latch. Hours later, the result came back. The cooler had been purchased at a hunting supply store 2 towns over, 3 weeks before the fishing trip, paid in cash. But there was a security camera above the counter. When she pulled the footage, her jaw tightened. It wasn't Thomas Miller buying the cooler. It was another man, tall, slim, wearing a gray hoodie. His face was shadowed, but one thing was clear. This was the same description Henry Walker had given before he mysteriously changed his story. The twist was undeniable. Someone else had been preparing for this crime. When Vargas showed the footage to Sheriff Harper, he leaned forward, his voice heavy. So Thomas didn't plan this alone. Either he was set up, or he had help. But who was the man in the hoodie? The next clue came from an unexpected source. Rachel, grief-stricken but desperate for answers. She showed up at the station clutching a shoebox of old family photos. This is all I have, she said softly. Maybe something here will help you. I just need to know why. As detectives sifted through the photos, Vargas froze on one picture. It was from a family reunion 5 years ago. There was Thomas, awkwardly smiling. Next to him was a taller man in, you guessed it, a gray hoodie. Rachel frowned when she saw it. That's Carl. Carl Jenkins. He used to be Thomas's fishing buddy. Haven't seen him in years. A name. Finally, they had a name. They dug deeper. Carl Jenkins had a criminal record, burglary, assault, drunk driving. He'd been in and out of jail, but had always circled back to Springfield. And then came the most damning discovery. Carl had been spotted at a gas station near the fishing dock the morning of Ethan's disappearance. Surveillance cameras showed him buying duct tape, rope, and beer, the same items found in Thomas's truck. It was all falling into place, but the picture was far more complicated now. If Carl had been there, what was Thomas's role? Was he a willing accomplice? Or had Carl forced him into something darker? The detectives needed answers, fast. They brought Thomas back into the interrogation room and slammed the photos of Carl on the table. Tell us the truth, Vargas demanded. Was Carl with you? Did he hurt Ethan? For the first time, Thomas broke down. Tears streamed down his face. He buried his hands in his hair, shaking. I didn't want this, he sobbed. I swear to God, I didn't want this. Carl said we were just going to fish. Said it was just for fun. Then everything went wrong. What went wrong? Harper snapped. Thomas's lips trembled as he whispered, Carl wanted the boy. The room went cold. It was a breakthrough they needed, but it was also a revelation darker than anyone had expected. Now the hunt wasn't just for a runaway uncle. It was for a predator hiding in their community. And Carl Jenkins was still out there. The manhunt for Carl Jenkins gripped Springfield like a storm. His face was plastered across every news channel, his mugshot, gaunt cheeks, hollow eyes, a scraggly beard, circulating online. Parents locked their doors tighter. Kids were kept inside, and the town buzzed with one chilling question. Had Carl done this before? Sheriff Harper felt the pressure in his bones. Every call from the mayor, every headline from press, every tearful plea from Rachel Miller. all landed squarely on his shoulders. And worse, Thomas Miller wasn't a simple villain anymore. He was a broken man, complicit but terrified, whose story painted Carl as a true monster. But the more investigators dug, the more tangled the web became. Carl Jenkins had been living off the grid for months. No stable address, no job, no paper trail. But Vargas discovered something unsettling. Several missing children cases from neighboring counties stretched back years. None were solved. And in at least 2 of them, witnesses had reported seeing a tall man in a gray hoodie lurking near the scene. The profile fit Carl perfectly. "This isn't just about Ethan," Vargas said one late night, slamming her fist on the table. "Carl could be a serial predator. And if that's the case, every day he's free is another day a child's in danger." The FBI was called in, adding fuel to the investigation. But with federal agents came politics, jurisdiction fights, and mounting public scrutiny. Harper felt sidelined, his team pushed aside, while higher-ups demanded results yesterday. Meanwhile, Rachel's grief turned to fury. At a vigil in front of the courthouse, her voice shook as she spoke to the crowd. "My son is gone because evil wore the face of someone we trusted. Don't tell me to be patient. Don't tell me to wait. Find him. Find him." Her words struck a nerve, echoing across news outlets nationwide. Now the case wasn't just Springfield tragedy. It was America's headline. But Carl wasn't hiding quietly. 2 weeks into the manhunt, a family in a nearby town reported a break-in. Their garage was raided, food stolen, and muddy footprints led into the woods. The prints matched the size 9 boot impressions from the fishing dock. Carl was close. The search shifted to forest outside Springfield. Drones scanned overhead. Dogs sniffed the underbrush, and deputies scoured abandoned cabins. Every rustle of leaves sent adrenaline spiking. And then came the near miss. Deputy Colton spotted a figure darting through the trees. Tall, wearing a hoodie. He gave chase, his flashlight beam bouncing wildly in the dark. "Stop! Police!" he shouted, lungs burning. But the man vanished into the thicket, leaving behind only a crushed beer can and a fresh cigarette, but still smoldering. The message was clear. Carl was taunting them, watching them, always one step ahead. Back at the station, Harper slammed his hand against the wall in frustration. "He's slipping through our fingers. Every damn time." Vargas's voice was low but sharp. "Sheriff, if he knows we're closing in, he might do something desperate. He might not run anymore. He might fight." It was a truth no one wanted to admit. Carl Jenkins wasn't just a fugitive now. He was a cornered predator. And predators are most dangerous when they're cornered. That night, as rain hammered the windows of the sheriff's office, Harper sat alone staring at the caseboard. Photos of Ethan, Thomas, Carl, and the fishing dock all stared back at him. For the first time, Harper felt doubt gnaw at him. Could he really bring Carl down before someone else got hurt? Could he give Rachel the justice she deserved? Or was he destined to fail, like so many investigators in the cases before Ethan's? The weight was crushing. Then, just before dawn, Harper's phone buzzed. It was a call from one of his deputies. His voice was shaky. "Sheriff, we found something. You'd better come quick." The break in the case had arrived, but it was nothing like what Harper expected. The call led Sheriff Harper and Detective Vargas to an abandoned hunting cabin deep in the woods. Rain slicked the dirt road, their headlights cutting to the fog as they pulled up. Deputies stood around the structure, their flashlights sweeping across broken windows and a sagging roof. Inside, one deputy said, his face pale. The cabin smelled of damp wood and stale smoke. Beer bottles littered the floor. A torn sleeping bag lay in the corner, still warm. But what made Harper's stomach drop was the wall. Pinned across the rotting boards were photos. Dozens of them. Children. Smiling faces cut from newspapers. Printed from the internet. Even candid shots that looked like they'd been taken secretly at parks and schoolyards. And in the center of it all, taped higher than the rest, was Ethan's school portrait. His shy smile stared back at them, almost mocking. Rachel's words, "My son is gone because evil wore the face of someone we trusted," echoed in Harper's mind. This wasn't just murder. It was obsession. On the table nearby sat a worn journal. Vargas carefully flipped it open, her gloved fingers trembling. Inside were ramblings, names, places, twisted fantasies. Carl had written about collecting memories, about keeping them close, and the last entry chilled them both. The boy was supposed to be mine. Thomas ruined it. He'll pay too. It was the final push Harper needed. This ends now, he growled. The task force doubled their efforts. They tracked Carl's movements through reports of stolen food and supplies. Farmers spotted him in their fields at night. A hunter swore he heard someone cry in the woods, only to find no one there. Carl was close, circling like a wolf, but Harper knew brute force wouldn't catch him. Carl had grown up in these woods. He knew every trail, every hiding place. Chasing him head-on would just lead to more near misses. So Harper tried something else. He ordered a decoy operation. Deputies staged a camp near the river, leaving behind supplies and food as bait. Hidden cameras were set up. Snipers waited in the trees. If Carl wanted to taunt them again, this time they'd be ready. Hours passed. The camp sat quiet under the moonlight. Then, just after midnight, movement. A shadow crept from the trees, tall, cautious. The figure slipped into the camp, rifling through the supplies. His hood was up. Harper's earpiece crackled. Target in sight. Orders. Harper's heart pounded. They had one chance. Hold. Confirm it's him. The figure bent down to grab a can of beans. For a brief moment, the hood slipped back under the moonlight. It was Carl. Go! Harper barked. Lights exploded. Officers swarmed. Carl bolted, crashing into the trees like a panicked deer. Shots rang out, not to hit, but to slow him down. The chase tore through the underbrush, branches slapping faces, mud sucking at boots. Vargas was right behind Harper, her breath ragged. "Don't let him slip," she shouted. But Carl was fast. Too fast. He darted down a slope, disappearing into mist near the riverbank. When Harper and his team arrived, they froze. The river rushed dark and violent, swollen from the rains. On the muddy bank lay Carl's boot prints, leading straight into the water. But no footprints came out. They scanned the river desperately, flashlights dancing across the current. Nothing. Carl Jenkins had vanished, either swept away by the river or hiding beneath its shadows, waiting for another chance to strike. The final showdown was coming. Harper could feel it in his bones. But if Carl had truly slipped away into the river, it meant catching him alive would be far harder than they ever imagined. And Rachel Miller was still waiting for justice. The following days were a blur of helicopters, divers, and search parties combing the riverbanks. Locals gathered to watch, whispering prayers or muttering curses under their breath. Was Carl Jenkins dead, dragged under by the angry current? Or was he out there somewhere, biding his time? Sheriff Harper didn't gamble on hope. "No body, no closure," he told his team. "We keep looking." For nearly a week, they found nothing but branches, dead fish, and false alarms. Each passing day chipped away at morale. Rachel Miller, exhausted and hollow-eyed, showed up at the station daily. "Don't tell me he's gone," she pleaded. "I need to see him in cuffs. I need to look him in the eye when justice is served for Ethan." Then, on the seventh morning, a break came. A farmer 2 towns over called to report a stranger limping across his field at dawn, soaked and barefoot. He tried offering help, but the man bolted into the woods. Deputies rushed to the area. Within hours, they flushed Carl Jenkins out of thicket. Clothes torn, face gaunt from hunger. He fought like a wild animal, scratching and swinging, but 5 officers brought him down, shackling his wrists in the mud. For the first time, Rachel's plea was answered. Carl Jenkins was in cuffs. The climax, the trial that followed, was one of the most closely watched in Missouri history. Prosecutors painted Carl as a predator who targeted children, manipulating Thomas into luring Ethan on that fishing trip. The evidence, the cooler, the duct tape, the journal from the cabin, stacked against him like a wall. Thomas Miller, though not innocent, became a reluctant witness for the state. On the stand, he wept as he described Carl's grip on him. "He told me it was just a trip," Thomas sobbed. "I didn't know. I swear, I didn't know what he planned." The jury didn't buy full innocence, but they saw the fear in Thomas's eyes. In the end, he was convicted of accessory to murder sentenced to 20 years. Carl Jenkins, however, faced the full force of the law. With overwhelming evidence and a jury of 12 grim-faced citizens, the verdict was swift. Guilty of first-degree murder, kidnapping, and child endangerment. The judge's gavel came down hard. Life without parole. Rachel wept in court, clutching Ethan's photo. "Finally," she whispered. Justice. The aftermath. Life never returned to normal for the Millers. Rachel lived with a permanent hole in her heart, her days haunted by memories of her son's laugh, his baseball glove still sitting by the door. But she stood tall at vigils for other missing children, turning her grief into a mission. "No family should ever feel what I felt," she told the crowd. Sheriff Harper carried the scars too. He had seen the worst of humanity, a predator hiding in plain sight, and it weighed heavy. Yet he also saw the power of persistence, the refusal to quit even when the case seemed lost. For Springfield, the fishing dock became a place of mourning, a reminder that evil can lurk even within family ties. But it was also where the town came together, vowing to protect its children with sharper eyes and stronger voices. And for Ethan, though his life was cut cruelly short, his story ignited a fire that would protect others. In the end, justice came, but not without cost. The fishing trip that began as a promise of fun ended as a tragedy that scarred an entire community. And though Carl Jenkins would spend the rest of his days behind bars, the echoes of that cooler on the dock, the betrayal, the grief, the fight for truth, would never be forgotten.